you guys are probably tired. It's a long conference, and we're at the tail end, and you're probably ready to get some food and stuff. So I'm going to level with you. I am really ill, and I took a lot of drugs to do this talk. And
Share!
They're going to wear off, okay? We got to get this done, okay? We're on a schedule, all right? Okay, so this is about cowboy coding and design and the process we go through when we write code. I got told recently I always give these crazy, deep technical talks that show what you can do, but I never talk about how or why. So this is my attempt to do the other thing. This is the second time I've given a keynote, which is a lot funnier if you know this. Right? Let's just say there were complaints. But I decided to try it again because the theme here was pretty intriguing. Individual improvement and open source participation. That's what they told me when they asked me to come out. I thought, that is so cool. I can come to a conference and just talk about me. Right? Which is great. Let's do that. This bio over here is the 1-star review of the Ruby Roads on iTunes Music Store. They don't say who they're singling out there, but I hope it's me. Yeah. That was nice of them to write that bio for me. So I've come to feel that I have some natural gifts that make me a better programmer. And so I thought I'd tell you about that. I'm really good at hacking. And I'm not talking about the time you've heard me doing all conference, which is the sick hacking, but more the quick fix, shelling out to some Unix program to do some crazy thing, or crafting together some horrible regular expression, or whatever. Those are the kind of things that are really my element. I enjoy doing, and I'm just good at. And then I know you can't see the code here, but it's just a crazy data structure, arrays inside of hashes, inside arrays, inside of hashes, kind of thing. And I find that I can keep that in my head pretty well. Like, everybody has a limit of what they can keep in their head, and you're eventually going to hit the limit, but I think my limit might just be a little bit higher than average, and I can follow it down farther. And then the other thing is my attitude. And I actually got in trouble recently for being too optimistic. We were pair programming, me and a buddy I work with, and it's late in the afternoon. We were building this really complicated thing, step by step, and late in the afternoon, and we were ready for the next step, and we had talked it out and decided what we had to do, and I'm like, that's not that bad. And he turns around and rounds up, and he's like, you said that 3 hours ago. That's a good point. So I don't know about you, but I kind of like the way this talk is going so far. Seems great to me. No, I'm just messing with you. All those things I've been telling you about, those are my natural tendencies, and I really don't like them. I actively work against those things to try to suppress those tendencies of myself. And I'll show you why. So the quick hack, what I find is that it becomes this bomb that's just waiting there eventually, and one day it blows up on me and causes me problems, right? And I don't get to choose when one day is, and it's generally whenever it's least convenient, of course. So I tend to shy away from those things more these days. Not that they totally don't have their place, but I try not to reach for them all the time. And complexity, being able to track complexity, that's not a gift, that's a curse. Being able to make the code where you don't have to track the complexity, that's a gift, right? It's finding a way to make the code walk you through it and tell you what's going on. And finally, even my attitude at times can get me in trouble. I mean, if your client just came to you and said, I need this thing, and like me, I just say, yeah, I can do it. and then I'd leave for 6 months and come back with some scary invoice. That's not exactly what they had in mind, right? They were the back and forth discussion of, should we do this? Is there some way we can get 80% of this, but like in 2 days instead of 2 months? Those kinds of conversations are good for us to be having, right? So this lifestyle I'm talking about, this is the cowboy coder, right? The lone gunslinger, someone who just throws together code and puts it together and makes it happen. And it turns out that I'm actually the most qualified Rubyist to talk about cowboy coding. You may not know this, but I have a brother named Peyton, which turns out to be significant. This is my brother Peyton. It was his birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Peyton. Do you understand why this qualifies me to talk about cowboy coding? I'm getting kind of some blank stares, a little concerned. My brother is named after a cowboy in the greatest Western of all time. You do know what that is, right? Silverado. There we go. How many people have seen Silverado? Raise your hands. Oh, wow. You people have homework. Oh, what? Jeez. Okay, I guess I know what the party is tonight. Yeah, my brother is named after this cowboy, which for those of you who have seen Silverado, you'll already spot the difference because my brother's name is not spelled the same as the cowboy in the movie. It's actually significant. You can see it scratched into his saddle here. And by the way, I was horribly disappointed that I could not Google for this picture. I had it in my mind, and the internet failed me here. So I had to go get my DVD, because of course I own the greatest Western of all time, and try to get a copy of it, but Apple blocks you from taking pictures of DVDs for copyright purposes. So yeah, that got complicated. So anyways, I suffered to bring you this picture, and my mother originally spelled my brother's name the same way it is in the movie, and everybody started pronouncing it Podden, and that bothered her because then they weren't saying it correctly the way they say it in Silverado. So she changed it on the birth certificate so that they would say it like it's supposed to be said. So therefore, my brother's actually more Silverado than the real thing, I think. So now that we've established my qualifications, which are amazing, I also have expert tools like Twitter. And you can ask this questions. It's kind of like Ask an Expert, but a lot more random. And so I went to Twitter and asked them, what is the opposite of a cowboy coder? What's the antonym? And there were some people who thought, kind of along the lines I did, team player, professional, considerate coder. I love this one. I once did a presentation where I said the antonym was a Navy SEAL. They fight as a team, not as a lone gunslinger. That's a pretty cool answer, right? How about this one? This is my fave. Do you know Satish? He's, I think he's Indian Guru on Twitter. He's Indian Rubyist. He does more than you can possibly imagine, and he's absolutely the nicest guy in all of Ruby. He found out recently I'm taking a vacation that he had taken before, so he just sent me an email with all these cool things he did when he took the same vacation, just in case I wanted to hit those on the way by or whatever. Really great guy. So I love that answer. I thought it was great. These weren't the most common point of view, though. This is what people actually said to me. The opposite of the cowboy coder is the architecture astronaut, someone who over-architects everything, right? So I'm not sure it's really this simple that we can just put it on a scale, but it's probably good enough to be a useful thought exercise. So let's consider this, where we have cowboy coders at one end and architecture astronauts at the other. I assume that I don't need to say that these points, are probably something we want to avoid. I've already talked about the problems with cowboy coding. Architecture astronaut, if you overdo everything, you get to the point where you can't really make reasonable changes anymore, right? So we want to stay away from the endpoints. But what that doesn't mean is that this is the right answer, right? It doesn't have to be the midpoint. That doesn't have to be the spot we're aiming for. I think normally I sit somewhere around here, a little bit over to the side, a little bit toward the architecture side, right? When I was a young programmer, And the client would call me and say, I need this report. Can you just dump out such and such table? I need fields X, Y, and Z. Throw it in something I can open up in Excel. And I would log into the server, fire up like a production IRB setting, figure out the query, dump it to a CSV file, whatever, send it over to the client. And then I would do the horrible mistake. I would type EXIT, right? And the reason that was horrible is because, 1 or 2 hours later, the client calls back, oh, yeah, that was pretty good. Now, what I need is, to see this thing in there or compared with this, and I would fall for it again, right? Do the same thing. And then, they'll call back. Or a month later, worse, when you really forgot how you figured out that query, right? Then, that report you sent us about a month ago? No. Well, we're going to need that on a regular basis now. And so now I don't do that. If they ask for a report, I'll at least throw in a reports.rake file or in the task directory, put it in there, and then next time I have to fiddle with it, it's just a matter of fiddling, right, or something like that. So I lean a little bit that way. We could consider this a different scale. I'm currently concerned with health, so this seemed appropriate. Again, I assume the endpoints look unattractive. Hypochondriacs are at least wasting resources, right, time and money, probably. And those who avoid doctors, we have things like rheumatic fever, which is just people who get strep throat over and over and over again and never go see a doctor, right? If you go see a doctor at some point and get antibiotics, you probably won't get rheumatic fever. But if you don't, who knows? Now, there can be different places you want to be on this scale, maybe even at different times, right? Over here, if you're in your 20s, say, and still pretty young, and just statistically speaking, you're not going to have as many problems and they're not going to be as bad, right? So maybe you can afford to lean a little bit this way. If you're older, or say you turn up deathly ill the week before you're supposed to give a keynote, maybe you should be a little bit over on this side, and panic a little more. I think normally I sit somewhere around here just because I find it comforting to know, if I don't get better in a couple of days, I like to go to the doctor and at least give him a chance to give a name to whatever I have. Makes me feel better, I guess. But there can be different reasons to be at different spots on the scale, right? And this is kind of the point. You play any of these positions, you're gambling. There's going to be days when the cowboy coder wins. There's going to be times when the hypochondriac is right. Right? I told you that was bubonic plague when we were all going to be exposed. Eventually, they'll be right, But some gambles are safer than others, right? But this, Vegas works like this, right? Just because there's two different choices, that doesn't mean your odds are 50-50, right? When a client calls you for a report, it's not a one-time thing, I promise. Never is. It's never a one-time thing. There's certain positions that are safer to play. And context matters, right? Like we said, there can be times when you should be more this way and times when you should be more that way. And if you can tune your process to that context, then that makes you a great programmer, right? If you can apply the right amount of oomph for the problem at hand, then that's really a great thing. Which it's also worth noting that this doesn't have to be a personality flaw. Just being on a project over time, you might slide more toward cowboy coder as things go on. That's because you're going to get more and more familiar with everything. Eventually, you're going to have it all loaded into your head, and that means you don't feel pain as easily as you used to, right? When you have to make changes, you're familiar with that, so you know to go check that other thing. It's natural. This is Michael Feathers talking about it on Parlay, and he went on to say that Google can actually track this in their, internally in their employees. They have like burn-in metrics. And so we may need to be aware of this and watch for this over time, or transition people out to other projects, or swap people around, or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a line of thinking. It can be natural. So does the cowboy coder have their place? And I say absolutely they did. There are times when those skills are very valuable. Spiking, when we're just trying something out. What would happen if I took this library and ran it through this library, and what would that look like? We don't want infrastructure in those cases. We don't want to overdo it because we want to be able to rip it up and try it with the pieces in different order or whatever. So that's a time and a place for throwing the architecture out the window. Some kind of internal hack, you know. We have this problem, this complicated process we have to go through all the time. It just affects us. It's wasting a lot of our time. It's annoyance, you know, let's solve this. It doesn't necessarily need a lot of architecture. And then the quick fix, right? You come in Monday morning and the backups are down. You know the backups are down. Ideally, you'd have two teams here, right? One needs to be getting a backup right now. You don't want them to be careful. You don't want them to, you know, have a lot of process. You just want them to do it now. And then the other team, you want to get data, figure out what went wrong, you know, how are we going to fix that, prevent it in the future. But the Cowboy coder definitely has their place there. So I want to talk a little about DHH because he and I sometimes debate these issues publicly for fun and profit. And he turns out to be kind of an interesting counterexample, I think, that may not be much of a counterexample. So let's take a look at it. On days when I'm sparring with DHH and I'm trying to decide where he sits, I'm almost sure it's right here. But I kid, he's not really there, but sometimes it feels that way to me. These are some blog posts he's done recently on, recently being like 6 months-ish, on the 37 Signals blog, where he talks about he likes to, you know, say no to things because he feels that's how things get over-architected. And he likes to control that, which is great, right? And a key skill for somebody in his position because he's the funnel how things end up in Rails, right? So if he didn't do that, then Rails would have so many crazy more features and stuff like that. And one of the things he loves to throw around is YADNI, which, you know, stands for you ain't gonna need it, right? And you shouldn't put it in there because of a someday. But he and I don't agree on the definition of that. And actually, as I was reading this pattern vision article again to put it in this slide, I was reading the paragraph and he actually cites YADNI in the last paragraph you can see here. And I was reading it and I'm all, that's not actually what that word means. It was my thought. And he had it hyperlinked, so I clicked it and read the definition. I think it's a terrible definition he linked to. And it's not what I think it means. So I went and got what I consider to be a more canonical definition from the C2 wiki. And here's the excerpt I think is important. This doesn't mean you should avoid building flexibility into your code. It means you shouldn't over-engineer something based on what you think you might need later on. And the emphasis is the same way it is in the article. I left it their way. But I would emphasize the first sentence. This doesn't mean you should avoid building flexibility into your code. It is not a YADNI violation to decouple things, right? That keeps your code loose and malleable so that you can change it in the future, and that's allowed. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. That's something we should all be doing. Even something, if you absolutely know you're going to need it later, it may not even be a YADNI violation to go ahead and allow for that, to at least leave the extension point. Now, this is definitely gray area now, and we should be careful here because, as Sandy Metz loves to say, you'll never be dumber than you are right now, right? So when you actually get to the part where you have to build the thing that you have to build, then you're going to know more what you need. But if you know you're eventually going to need to hook into this process, leaving a method hook there or something, that's not necessarily a YADNI violation, in my opinion. So I kid, DHH isn't really over here. And he's publicly corrected me when I've said stuff to this effect, which I'm very grateful for because it helped me understand him better. And actually, he's a lot more boring than I thought because I think he sits right about here, which may look kind of familiar. And I'm going to tell you why I think he sits here. When we had Sandy on Ruby Rogues, she mentioned that her clients wanted her to just give them some rules of design. And it didn't even really matter what the rules were. We all know rules aren't universal anyway, right? That was the whole point of Michael's talk yesterday. And but they needed some metric. They needed a way to measure, are we getting better? Are we doing better design, right? So in that case, any arbitrary rule is helpful if it pushes you in the right direction. So she just made some up, basically. Classes under 100 lines, methods under 5, don't do more than 4 parameters, and you can't just make it one giant hash. Rails controllers can only instantiate one object. Now, I haven't asked DHH, I'm totally guessing here, but I suspect he would not like these rules. He's not much of a rules guy to begin with. He says things about people who follow line limits, subscribe to the ridiculous church of 80 character lines, which is a lot funnier because I follow an 80 character line limit. So I like that quote. Also, he's very publicly outspoken against things like the law of Demeter and things like that. So I suspect he would find these rules constraining. But let's take a look at DHH's design, which he's very public about, right? He thinks you can boil the web down to pretty much this. And he talks a lot about how when we're failing to find ways to put things in Rails apps, we're just missing these resources that we can extract with these 7 standard interfaces, right? If you give him all the boilerplate code I'm showing on this site and 10 lines per method, which is double what Sandy recommends, he'll still come in under her class line count. So DHH is designing carefully, right? He's found a system that works for him, that gets him to chunk these things up, build them in reasonable pieces, make things small enough that he can shape them and move them around. And so I think he's actually following things like this, even though sometimes he's throwing around Agni violations and stuff like that. And I just want to say to this, you see lots of us debating in public, Corey Haynes or me or DHH or anybody else. We battle this all out on Twitter in a very public style. And then, of course, the first thing that has to happen is the Ruby Drama site has to be updated. But it's not really drama, right? We are a very passionate people that are trying to figure out the best way we can possibly build software. And when we have these debates in public, that's what we're doing. We're trying to figure this out. And that's a good thing, actually. So I think we should be more proud of that. All right, let's talk about the value of code. There is actually a real lesson we can learn from Silverado. You haven't seen it, so I'm going to have to explain it to you. All of these cowboys get together, surprise, it's at Western, and they have some early successes and do some things. And then when they get to Silverado, they all go their separate ways, kind of. And things go really downhill from there. Houses get burned down. A guy gets tied up and trampled by horses. One of them gets locked in jail and beaten. I mean, really bad. And then they all come together again in the end, for one of those typical Western endings where 4 guys ride up against one of those mansions that has an order of magnitude more bad guys in it, and they take them all out, no problem. And it's almost clown car funny, right? I have no idea where all these people are sleeping. There's no way there's enough beds in the house, I'm telling you. But the important thing is, it's whenever they're together, they have their successes, and whenever they're apart, they struggle, right? That's the same for us. I can't write all the code. I wish that I could. I enjoy it, and I would love to do it, but I can't, right? I don't know, you may have noticed, but every time you turn some stone in programming, it's like an Alice in Wonderland type hole underneath, right? You don't have time to visit all of those, right? So we have to let other people write other code for us. And if we're going to be working with other people's code, it's about communication, 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 both from the code and from these people that you're going to have to interact with, right? So Kent Beck says it best, I think, in Smalltalk Best Practice Patterns when he says, the primary purpose of code is to communicate with the reader, not to do the thing that it's meant to do, to communicate with the reader. That's the primary purpose. You got to do that first, right? So let's think about it this way. Code has some value to it. The thing that it's supposed to do, right? If it's a Twitter library and it talks to Twitter, then it has that value. It also has value in its ability to teach you how it works, right? To guide you through the process so you can figure it out. And there's this kind of synergy between these things. Once I can understand how it works, then I can use that to influence what it does, right? I can choose to override this particular part of it for this special case that I understand better for my needs, right? And it's this ability to affect it, but that relies on my ability to understand it. And when I can't understand it, when that value is missing, then I lose this synergy, and it makes me leery to even trust the other thing, whatever it does, because if I can't affect that process, then what if I need to make changes? So I think that's the reason code being communicative is so important. And to me, that's why you've probably seen me talk before about libraries that I love to read through. REST client's one of them. Sinatra is pretty cool. I read through that not too long ago. And just some of the tricks in it, how when you do set some variable, that turns into a method that then can be inherited down from subclasses. And it's a very interesting way to do stuff. And good code kind of draws me in like a book, you know, and I want to figure it out and see how it works. And I love that quality. I think we should be aiming for more of that. So the whole point of this rambling is that there's this hidden war we go through when we write code, and it kind of takes place in our heads, and so maybe isn't as external as it needs to be, but we should be trying to keep this code understandable and communicative and flexible, and Martin Feller, of course, says that way better than I can. When working with a student recently, we were playing around with IRC bots because, you know, fun. And he was trying to parse messages that come from IRC. And there's some prefix followed by a command, what the server's trying to tell you. And then 0 or more parameters can be attached to that. And the last parameter is a bit wonky because it's the only one that can have white space in it. So it has like different rules. And a solution he landed on was something closest to this, where he just tried some gnarly regular expression to bust it apart, you know, into separate pieces. And I loved it because that would be my instinct too. That would be exactly what I would just try to do. But it doesn't communicate well, right? If you don't know really what's going on here, it's just some nasty regex that you got to try to figure out, and the magic numbers of what each piece is. And we can make that better, right? Even if we just take small steps, right? Let's space out the regex. Let's add some examples. Let's switch to name matching and refer to things by name. And we're getting the domain logic in the code now, right? It's starting to become clear what these individual pieces mean and how they affect each other. I think we should at least go this far. I would argue we should at least go this far. It turns out my student had some pain when he was editing that big regex because he would change one thing, trying to get an example to go, and then he would realize that he broke something somewhere else because he changed how the whole expression was matching. If you want to get around that, you might do something like grab string scanner, which can let you walk through the data in chunks, and then maybe use some compose method to separate out the bits, and then look at how the individual parsing pieces just simplify down, right? Now there are these super simple regular expressions that are only concerned with a very minor thing at each point. And there's a lot more of this. You know, I've played pretty fast and loose with the prefix here. It's actually complicated and has several different forms. Sometimes there's a username in there you might want to get out. If you had to change that code, here you could probably just edit this one method and reasonably be okay. There's a chance you could muck things up downstream, but less so than with the big regex version. Some people call this going too far at this step. I would probably design close to this step in a first shot, but if you call it I'm totally cool with that. The second one's short enough that that I think you're not risking very much putting that into play. And then when you feel the pain, you can move up the price, right, if you need to. But right, there's this decision. You see, even when I'm trying to explain it to you here, right? Should we go this far? Should we go that far? That's why these conversations are important, like what Michael was talking about yesterday, these design challenges where we bat these ideas back and forth. And we have to remember that cowboys get kind of flashy results, right? They have that script and it does 80% of the problem, and then they hand it to you and you go fix it up. And you come back 3 days later and you've integrated it, and they're like, why did it take you 3 days? And wasn't it mostly done? Well, yeah, kind of. We had to handle some errors. We had to make sure we don't yank up 2 gigs of RAM when this happens or that. That's the hidden stuff, right? That goes on. It's not very flashy because it all looks like zero velocity work, right? Where we're not doing anything. But it's the important stuff. It's why we get paid to do what we do, right? To plan accordingly and keep things working correctly. And of course, there's a price to be paid in time when we're doing things correctly, testing, refactoring, improving design and stuff. All of that adds up. There's a cost to it. And yeah, I believe it's worth it, and we should do it, but we have to realize there's a cost to it. And so, stay aware of that and when we're spending that cost and when it's worth it. So this is my opinion. I believe this design stuff is important and that we have to champion this cause and make other people understand that this stuff is important. And that we have to care about this and do a better job of putting things together. How do we care about this stuff? There's a million different ways. I'm just going to give you some random examples. These came out of a conversation I had with Katrina, a fellow Ruby Rogue. She had some great tips, and I thought they were awesome, so I thought I'd just put them up here. I'm not going to make you raise your hands because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but think about this. I bet everybody in this room has heard there are only 2 hard things in programming, naming things and cache invalidation. Sometimes we throw in the joke and off by 1 at first, right? But the important thing is that naming things is hard. We know this. It's famously hard in our culture. Now, how many of you keep a thesaurus on your desk or have a hotkey on your computer so that you can instantly search a thesaurus? If not, you could be a better programmer, right? This is a famous hard problem programmers have. Naming things. This is a book designed to help you name things, right? These go together, I promise, okay? That's one thing we can do. This tactic I didn't understand until embarrassingly far into my career. But we have this mental stack that we're keeping up all the time, right? You know how that feels? You get that stack built up in your head, and you're manipulating it through, and then you're halfway through, and you realize something is wrong, and you know that you need to fix that, but you can't pull on the middle of the stack or the whole thing comes down, right? And we probably all know we would rather not have the comment if we don't need it. We would rather have the code just be straightforward and tell us what the comment would have told us, right? So just write the comment. That gets it out of your head, out of your stack. Then keep unwinding the stack, get it where you need it to be, fix the code the way you need to fix it, then delete the comment, right? It's about getting it out of your head so that you can go forward and then you can circle back and hit it and fix it when you can freely think about it. It's a good trick. And then communicate, man. I can't stress this one enough. And I know that people agree with me on this. Even DHH, who I was poking some fun at earlier, he put up a list of the 5 most important computer books that affected him. And the first 4, famous tomes, patterns of enterprise application architecture, et cetera. The 5th one is a book about how to communicate. That's true. It's one of the key secret skills a programmer needs is how to communicate. You have to work with other people, clients, and other programmers. You have to read code and stuff like that. A good book I read recently was Nonviolent Communication. If you want a book to check out, it teaches you how to speak in a way that you express your feelings and needs, which is actually kind of important. and listen to other people trying to figure out what their feelings and needs are, which is called empathy, right? And I assume we all know that. So anyways, these are just some things you can do. Obviously, there's lots of other things you could do. And the important thing is that I think we focus on these things and we find them. That's all I had to say. Thanks very much.